Hi there, welcome to the Accidental Pop Star here on YouTube. My name is Ali Beg. For this episode, I'm talking to Pat Kane from Scottish band Hue Cry. I'll come on to them in just a moment. But if you're watching for the very first time, just let me give you a quick explanation to what this channel is all about. So I was once a member of a boy band. We were called Bad Boys Inc. We were around between 1992 and 1995 before we actually split up in the spring of that year. Now, the experience was amazing, it was incredible, and I'm very grateful for it, so please don't get me wrong, but when we split up, the whole experience left a bit of a dark cloud hanging over me. I didn't know where to go next, I didn't know who to turn to, and there were many unanswered questions that I felt needed answered, but nobody was there to help. So what I want to do with this channel is see if I can find common ground by talking to pop stars, both past and present, and just compare our own stories. Now, Hue Cry are two brothers from Scotland, Pat and Greg Kane. Pat and I spoke about fame, we spoke about the industry, the success, and we also spoke about behaviour and whether in this day and age it's more important for Hue Cry to sell out concerts and gigs than it is to actually have chart success. So welcome to the Accidental Pop Star, Pat Kane from Hue Cry. Hi Pat, it's lovely to meet you. Thank you so much for jumping on. You're looking really well. Are you well?
I'm all right. I've got my nice shirt on. I'm relaxed after, a few days after gigging. Glass of wine last night, so slightly rough around the edges, but essentially a pillar of well-being.
Good man. Thank you for jumping on. Let's jump straight in. Can I take you right back to your childhood? Did you and Greg have any conception of what the music industry was like and what you would need to do to break into it?
Me less so, Gregory a lot more so. He was playing in bands, punk bands, post-punk bands. He was playing everything from saxophone to bass to guitar, and so he was heavily involved in the music business, and I was a sort of dilettante, sort of farting around on the sidelines. And he started to join local bands, and I remember one time depping for one of the singers and realizing that I had a voice that fitted with pop music, and then he realized that as well. So that was really in the early mid 80s, just jumping around the west of Scotland, jumping into various bands that were inspired by our favorite artists, people like everything from the Specials to Scritti Politti, and we tried to make those kind of noises with our scratchy pals in Masonic halls in various parts of the central belt of Scotland.
Did you want to be a pop star, or did you want to be defined as something else?
No, I was very keen to be a pop star because I was interested in, I was interested in the idea artistically. I think Gregory could speak for himself, but for myself, I was a very political and intellectual lad. Went to Glasgow University 81 to 85, and was sort of inspired by tracks like the Specials' Ghost Town or Robert Wyatt's Shipbuilding, and bands like sort of Gang of Four and Heaven 17 and ABC, where they were wearing gold lame suits, but they were still sort of waving their fists at the government. So I thought, that's a great gig. That would be fantastic to be able to sort of combine my love of soul and jazz, which I'd sort of built up to the age of 18, 19, and then maybe intervene in the world a wee bit. Bring some arguments, turn some love songs upside down. And we did so, with our three big singles that we made were all kind of what I had planned to make when I was about 19, 20, which was we used to call it a sugar pill. So it would go down sweet, but there would be a taste at the back of it once you digested it that you'd be hooked on. So we were post punks. So a punk, 3 chords and the truth, a post punk, any chords and the truth, and a post punk wants to have a hit record while doing the preceding 2 stages of being punk. So it was the idea that the mainstream was a great place to be, great fun. It was the 80s, material excess of all kinds. But you could also put that all that money that record companies were making from CDs, you could put it to good use, and try and make the records that you were deeply inspired by get somewhere to get near that ideal. Yeah, 80s was quite a good time to do it.
When did it start to become real for you, Pat? Was it round about the time that you signed to an independent, or was it when the majors came sniffing about?
Um, well, it depends what you mean by real, doesn't it? If you're playing in clubs in Glasgow and your peers are competing with you and the audiences are loving you and you can see you're having an effect, that feels real up to a certain point. Then when you start to do strange things like play in nightclubs at 3 o'clock in the afternoon because the A&R man from London has flown up and that's the only time he stroke she, most usually he was available to see you. And so you're pouring out your performance to one guy sitting in a chair in the middle of the hall, that feels serious in a different way, which is that you're okay. We're now going to be at the beck and call of quite powerful forces, but you make your deal with the devil, and you see what you can get out of it. So flying up and down to London to meet people, and then flying back up again and thinking, what was the point? I think when we did a showcase gig at Ronnie Scott's in London, I think it was a full band, but I think it might also even equally been just me and my brother. That you thought, okay, this is serious. It's a classic club. It's the heart of London, and I felt capable of doing it. So at that point, I think that would have been about 1986. I felt, yeah, this is definitely, I can, not only is this the music business, I'm not intimidated by it. I can do it. We can do this. I think the same year we were flown off to Los Angeles to meet the American record company, and we did a video over there for our first single, I Refuse.
Yeah.
So that's when it felt real. Here I am in Los Angeles, stand up at the observatory, looking over the city, doing my photo session with John Baptiste Mondino. Here we are, I guess. And 1 year out of university, I mean, spoiled rotten, essentially.
There's been a pattern when I've spoken to the folk that have been very kind to have come on the channel, Pat. And the question that I ask them is, when you first sign, did you guys ever sit down with your record company executives and sort of discuss a roadmap or a plan for what was going to happen to you guys? And that pattern has always remained the same. The answer is no. And people never got involved in the process of how your career was seen by record company executives. Is it the same for you, or have you got a different story?
No, we've got a different story. We signed to a label called Circa.
Yeah.
And the other people on Circa were people like Nena Cherry. I think Massive Attack were on Circa for a wee while. So the people, Ashley Newton and Ray Cooper is passed now, but Ashley Newton, who's now head of Capitol Records in America, basically broke away from the major music business to create this kind of mega indie. Little did we know it was being funded by the Black American Express cards, but that was the case. And everything was riding on a hit happening, and luckily it did with Labour of Love. But we had a lot of input, and they wanted us to be who we were, which was kind of intelligent, passionate, and political Scots who were able to sing like a linty and try and write big hit records. They wanted us to do that, and the whole thing. And then we worked very closely with brilliant graphic designers who I had a ball with. They were in Soho. I went around to their studio. We threw bits of paper around the floor. We looked at picture libraries, came up with the covers that we wanted. And that was a great 3 years. It was a great from 1986 to about 1991. I would have said we had an ideal relationship, and certainly the template for everything else going forward, which is the two different brothers with different sensibilities, but coming together to make music comes from the heart and the head, was all planned. It was all planned.
So I guess that gave you the sense of feeling in control of your own
Yes,
destiny and your own
very much.
control. Because my story, and I know it's difficult to compare because we're on completely different levels, but my story is I always felt out of control and it was very
Mm.
much problematic. But for you, you felt in control.
Yeah. I mean, if you basically agree that you're going to try to make this as big as possible without trashing the spirit of what it is.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
so without trashing the spirit of what it is attention. So you don't do certain things and you do other things. So you sort of say, yes, we will open for Madonna at Wembley Stadium for 4 nights, because that gets us access. We might have to do a bit of stadium rocking, but that's fine. That gets you known. We might subject our track to a remixer, but it'll be a really good remixer, and we'll be happy with it, and we'll oversee it, and we'll approve it. I mean, maybe we maybe didn't create the volume because we didn't do that thing. We didn't want to go on a support with Annie Lennox all over Europe because we just didn't want to do it. Kids had come along, we wanted a bit of a rest. So there are opportunities that you do and you don't take. And I think we made our choices on the basis of quite high ideals. And luckily, for the first two hit singles happened within that system, which then makes everybody feel as if the thing's going forward. Third album, no hit single, and we were dropped at the end of 1991 from the major end of things. But what an intense education about how to balance art and commerce, about how to balance, exploiting yourself, and creating something beautiful that you think, well, let's get this out to people because we've made something amazing. So that was our thing, a balance of art and commerce.
So I'll come on to the singles in just a moment, but I know you slightly touched on it just a moment ago about your image, and I'd like to talk to you about your image because when I was a teenager growing up and I saw you for the first time, and I thought to myself, here's two guys, and what they reminded me of are two lads who have finished a hard day's work in the office and they've gone to their local jazz bar, and their way to relax is to just jam.
Mm-hmm.
And you've still got the suit on with the tie sort of slightly open, and you're just jamming, and that's your
Yeah.
release from your day's work. And I think that resonated with so many people. So was that always the plan?
Just really interesting point, actually. I think we were post punks, and
Yeah,
so the whole idea was that anything was available to you, but you could sharpen up a little. And there was a whole thing going on in our music at the time, actually, which I remember quite distinctly from the NME. The NME used to put cassettes on the front of the NME C86, but they would also put genre cassettes. They would have jazz, or they would have Latin, or they would have this, they would have that. And they were very influential to me because it was like, here in the midst of the heart of the music business, people are talking about the 50s, the 40s, the 50s, and the 60s. And along with the brilliant music that came along with that in jazz and soul came the style. So we were looking at what people were wearing, particularly around about the kind of mid 50s to mid 60s. And that was the glory days of the suit. That was the glory days of the florid tie and the perfectly tailored suit. And I think you're right. This was my father's music. My father was a great Sinatra fan, both in movies and music. And so I'm often told that I sing like my father. So maybe there were quite deep issues going on there. Maybe I'm sort of trying to kind of match up to my father by dressing like my father, singing like my father, being a father to myself, all that psychological stuff. And that just happened to fit with a kind of exploration of retro. I mean, there was all these great in the late 80s, early 90s, all these great American retro shops sprung up in Glasgow and London. And when we were in America, we would always make a beeline for Hollywood Retro on Hollywood Boulevard to kind of pick up silk ties and pick up suits and pick up whatever. So I think it all fit together. My own personal love of kind of wearing power suits from a vintage era matched up with the feel and the vibe of the zeitgeist at the time. And it worked. Obviously, it worked in terms of what you're talking about. People,
it did. It most definitely
in their leisure moments. That the music was a fit with their leisure moments. That was maybe a third factor as well.
Yeah. It was very simplistic, but it just worked, and that's what I loved about it. Let's talk about Labour of Love, because what I'm interested to know is that the process of how this record got to become a top 10 hit. Because I know back then it's completely different to what it is sort of during my time and even now. But you first went in at number 34 and eventually you ended up at number 6. So how were you able to build the momentum to get to number 6?
Well, the usual palaver of record pluggers, plugging the records away at the stations.
Did you get involved in that, Pat?
It didn't really. I did. Well, we met them. Guys called Ferret and Spanner.
Yeah.
And how they did it was, at one end of their roster they had U2. So we'll give you U2 if you playlist or think to playlist a couple of minnows, and the minnows would be us and various other people. So I observed all that happening. But the answer to your question is Los Lobos. Sorry, there seems to be police outside. Los Lobos mucked up their visa for that week's Top of the Pops. We got in on the basis of an administrative error. So we were number 38. So we wouldn't normally have been on Top of the Pops, but they were at short notice. They were down an act. So we were slotted in at 38. Did well. Got up to 16. I think 16, and then there to wherever it went to 6. And I think it was just the guys that we were involved with had been part of the major music business, so they had all the contacts and they were pulling all the strings. But there was a lot of enthusiasm on radio for the record, and I think it was kind of just after the miners' strikes and just before something else. It was a very sort of publicly tumultuous time. And I think the record has a certain resonance to the times that we didn't push it, and the radio people didn't ask for it, but they played it anyway, and they played the hell out of it. So I think it was chiming with people's sense of being aware of how things were politically, but also wanting to have a fantastic time. I mean, I have to tell you also, Ali, that I put my foot down. I said, this record shall never be a single. And people say, why not? I said, it's too up itself. It's too pretentious. Nobody could dance to it. The bass drum's all over the place. We're not putting this out. I have never been allowed to choose another single or anything to do with the music being in the public. Since that moment, I have been barred from the room.
Mate, it's an absolute classic, which I hear on a daily basis out here in Germany and Austria on local radio stations to this day. Yeah. And my kids now, because I sing along to it, I confess, are now getting into Hue and Cry as well because of it. What were you thinking, fella?
Well, it's a pure moment. You're sitting. We wrote it in Chapel's Music writing rooms in Holland Street in London, with a sort of a drum machine pattern, and Gregory wrote the piano line, the arpeggio, and I came up with a crazy lyric, "Withdraw my labour of love." Somehow thinking that the Arthur Scargill and the National Union of Mine Workers was a great metaphorical resource for writing pop songs. What was I thinking? But it goes like a train, and it continues like a train all the way to the end. Fantastic, all Scottish musicians, other than the strings and the horns, which were New York. So again, it was this sort of combination of stuff that was brewed up in a Glasgow rehearsal room, taken over to New York, sprinkled with fairy dust, and then sent out to the world with fingers crossed. So I never would have thought that would have been a hit record. No chance. So what's nice 35, 40 years on is that you just made all your quirkiest decisions, and you put them in all your pop records, and so therefore you can play them again and again and again, because you remember that you were shooting for the moon even at the first place with the song. You weren't compromising. You weren't working with co-writers. You weren't getting algorithms running over it to see whether it'll get played on Spotify, etc., etc., etc. It was very, very classic pop rock soul inventiveness, and to be proud of something that you did 40 years ago and be able to play it at any time with the same spirit is not a bad basis. Even if it's only 2 or 3 songs, that's not a bad basis for a vintage or a heritage career going forward.
I couldn't agree more. How did you find becoming famous? Because obviously with hit records come fame. So how did you find that whole process?
It didn't. I found it because of the shape of my personality at the time, which was kind of a arrogant misanthrope who had basically jumped on stage so that he didn't have to be with people around about him, because they were also such pests, such tall poppy choppers downers, it kind of inflated my ego to an insufferable degree. So I'm quite happy. So that was just inevitable. So basically I got more of what I'd wanted all the way through my teenage years, which was to be separated from these beasts who were just, beating me up all the time, or putting me down all the time. So it made that tendency worse. And certainly my poor brother got the brunt of it quite a few times. I'm happily out of that now, but it definitely exacerbated my desire to be in a bubble separate from everybody else, issuing commands out of the bubble so that nobody could bother me. Kids fixed that quite quickly, in 1989 and in 1997. And so I'm a better man now, but I was a holy terror then.
Okay, this is quite intriguing, because did there come a sort of a light bulb moment, Pat, when you thought to yourself, nah, this has got to change. My behaviour's got to change. My attitude's got to change. If just slightly indulge me, I remember we were doing a school gig once, and somebody had videoed it, and they sent us a copy of the VHS. And when we watched it back on the bus, I was absolutely mortified at my actions on stage. Mortified. And that was my light bulb moment. It made me completely change what I did on stage, how I behaved on stage, how I tried to rile up the crowd, all that sort of stuff. And it just changed everything, thankfully, for the better. Was there a light bulb moment for you?
Yeah, quite powerful.
Yeah.
We were out of the music business. It was about 1990, major music business. So in 1992, and we were talking to a label about bringing out a new record. And we were around a big table. And I must have been frustrated or annoyed in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
And my future partner was around that table as a PR person.
Okay.
And she managed to convey to me in the months afterwards, because I was quite into her, and we ended up getting ready to go out years later. But she sort of said, "You were the most imperious, demanding, arrogant, unpleasant man I'd ever met in my life." And
But she didn't hold back.
she didn't hold back. And so I discovered that a few years later. And it was enough in my mind to have a terrible sense of who it was that I had become, or this distorted, demanding monster that I'd become in the music business. And I thought that was a wake up call for me.
Okay.
And then I think also there's a sort of series of wake up calls when you've had what you think is kind of world straddling success, or at least mega European or British success. And you're playing in a pub in the north of England, not a pub, or kind of gastro pub in the north of England, because you're trying to do gigs, because you're trying to make money, because no one else is going to give you money if you don't play gigs.
Yeah.
And the turnaround on that is that it's a poor attendance. People think we're a covers band of the original band anyway, so they're not turned up. They can't believe we're actually playing this venue. And the people that are there are the people that are there. And then what I started to do, that's when I became a musician rather than some sort of scheming sub icon using his voice to create situations. And it was one of the best gigs I've ever done in my life because I played for them. They were there for us. It would have been a half full place. And we brought the house down. Because I just thought, here we are, here we are. This is what it's. If this is what you're down to, then value this. And I would say that's around about the early 2000s.
Okay.
And it was very important because now we do these gigs. We do a lot of these gigs at 300, 500, 150, 200 size venues. And the point is to make them an epiphany. The point is to make them celebratory. The point is for us all to have this amazing time 20, 30, 40 years on. And that was the start of me being a proper musician rather than a kind of situation creating pest.
See, when you again, you touched on it about getting dropped. See, when you think we're not quite having the chart success that we maybe first hoped for, even though you were charting, did there come an anxiety with that, Pat?
Yes, because that was the original. The original theory was to, you're looking at people like Elvis Costello or maybe even Sting or maybe even Steely Dan or Talking Heads, those kinds of people, and you're thinking, I wonder if we ever get to that status where people just love what you're doing, they pay for what they pay to make it great, and you get one or two hit singles off each album, and that just kind of keeps you going and gets you more and more resources and makes you more and more ambitious. So certainly when we brought out our third album, Stars Crash Down, we thought we were making a masterpiece. And all three of the singles sputtered at 45, 55, 66. And with enough money spent on the video, there was nothing stinted. But we thought we took ourselves to the south of France. We took ourselves to expensive studios. We brought in amazing musicians. We composed what we thought was the best, most eclectic stuff that we'd ever made. Songs that are beloved by audiences. A song called "She Makes a Sound," which is about my daughter being born, which is called for every gig. But that's a kind of shock. That makes you realise that your meteoric rise has stopped, and you've got to start to sort of dig in as to why you would do the music business in the first place. I mean, we did a thing in the mid-90s. We signed to a Scottish jazz label called Lynn Records, and we did these two records, one called Jazz Not Jazz and one called Next Move. And I love them, but to the audience that turns up to see a Let's Rock gig in Dalkeith last week, they would have them screaming for the exits, all of the songs that were on these. But so we thought at one point we were going to sort of disappear into a kind of jazz place, which would be appropriate because that's what our father was into, was jazz music. But we had a big event in 2006 which changed that entirely, which was a show called Hit Me Baby One More Time, which was just a classic Saturday night retro show, and that's created the latter part of the Hue and Cry career, which is as a kind of heritage act, as a kind of legacy act, nostalgia, whatever you want to call it.
Do you enjoy that?
I enjoy it for the reasons I gave you before, Ali, which is that the main songs that we're asked to play are songs I'm incredibly proud of.
Yeah.
We crafted them under the best possible conditions. So it's not like it's driving a nail into the side of my head every time I sing it. I'm thinking, do you know what? If I was trying to write a classic, I got close with any of these songs from that era. So it's quite easy. It's quite easy to do.
See, for a band like Hue and Cry, sort of latterly, and I wanted to ask this question to Kyle from The View. Does your success, does it depend on chart success? Or have we come now to a point in the industry, Pat, where your success now is deemed by the amount of concerts that you sell out, the amount of gigs that you sell out, and the amount of people that still come to watch you live? How do you deem your success now?
Well, it's an interesting question, Ali, because I would say up until quite recently, being a working musician, doing 70 to 100 gigs a year,
Yeah.
between 50 to 100 gigs a year, depending on how things are going. That has seemed to be a real mark of success. I mean, I've worked on my vocals over the years, so to go out and sing a body of work, particularly under your own name as well, the big tent things are great. But when you go out under your own name, you have a direct relationship with the audience. You've got 100, God, you've got 200 odd songs to draw on. They'll know about 50 of them. You can compose a great night. So when you have a great night, standing ovation, people going nuts at the end of it, and it's 300, 400 people in the room. Do that for a couple of months and you feel you are successful because it's okay paid, and you feel successful because you've given people all these experiences. Social media is something we're very actively into. I mean, we have this joke at the beginning of every gig where we say very, very, very strict rule here on use of your smartphones, enforced by gigantic bouncers, so muscly they look like condoms filled with walnuts. And here is the rule. Here is the solid rule that you must not deviate from in the use of this machine. If you don't record all your favourite songs, and if you don't put them up on Hue and Cry Facebook and Twitter, you're out.
Yeah.
You're chopped out of the building. Is that understood? General smiles all around because they're getting the opposite. But we love that. And we're very, very happy for people to record, stick it up on the socials. We commune with them. We talk to them as they do. So the success element of it is also to some degree now fueled by community. So we have a community of people, tens of thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people, depends how you get to them, how you dice them up, who want that experience. And we invite them to have that experience. So that feels like success because it sustains us sort of economically. But just recently, I wanted to make an EDM record. And so I said to my brother, we're going to make an EDM record because I have a long-standing love of electronic music from way back, weaving in around Cabaret Voltaire and Simple Minds and a certain ratio from the post-punk era. And I said, I think we can do this in a way that's coherent with our past rather than seems to be a clash with it. So we've done this record. And we're going to send it out to get some mixes done on it. And who knows? Who knows? A banger may land in a Spanish seaside resort. I don't know. We just have to see what happens.
Let's wait.
But watch this space, Ali. And again, that's a success, to be able to kind of redefine your sound in a way that's credible. I think, well, you'll hear it, you'll listen without prejudice, give it a go when it comes out. But that feels like artistic success, feels like creative success.
Yeah.
Everybody could hate it, but the fact that we've been able to do it in the last couple of years has felt like success.
What's the best piece of advice you were given?
Well, I wouldn't have been able to hear it up till about 1996, as I've previously suggested. In the music business.
Aye.
Yeah, I think the best advice that I've been given is, and I didn't follow it, and I've been following it ever since, is don't trash your relationships or nurture relationships in the music business. And also realize that the music business is a place for fragile souls a lot of the time. People are there sometimes because they're unemployable. Nobody else can figure out what to do with them. They're there for all manner of narcissistic reasons. There's a lack or an absence or a grief or a debt that's being answered by going up on stage and jumping about as if you've no cares in the world when you've all cares in the world. So that's the best advice that I was given. And I was given it by a roadie.
Oh, really?
Not really by anybody of any supposed stature, although he was a fine man. But he said, you've got to you've got to you've got to try and build relationships in the music business, because you can be the great diva and you can scorch the earth, but when things start to dip, you find that there's nobody out there that you can call on to get a favor or to get an outlet or to get a gig, a gig opportunity. So again, at the malformed age of 21, I wish someone had sat me down and said, this is the route to your future success, is to maintain relationships. But as I say, I was a furious post-punk, so I'm dealing with all my own background issues and childhood issues as well. So there we are.
At the age of 21, I will never forget Des O'Connor. We just finished doing the Des O'Connor show.
Yeah.
And he just said two very simple words to me after we finished what was probably our most horrific performance ever. He just took me to one side, put his arm around me, and he said, Ali, work harder.
Yes.
And from there on, that's all I needed, was just work harder. What do you think? Oh yeah, and we did, trust me. What do you think was your most wow moment?
Well, the moment I always remember, and again, it's not, I mean, you could say playing in front of all Madonna's people, or playing in front of all of Simply Red's people, or having Miles Davis's bassist play on your record. You could say all those things. But I remember we were out supporting Joe Jackson. We played a place called Orange, where a kind of an old Roman amphitheatre in the south of France. And I loved Joe Jackson. I don't think he loved anything, but his band grew to love us. And I just remember the sun coming down, beautiful sunset, on stage, and all the members of the Joe Jackson band amassing at the side of the stage. And then we finished the set, and then they all applauded.
Brilliant, really.
That's all I mean, what more do you need? This, and the comparable incident to that was that we were opening for James Brown in Aberdeen in 1990, I can't remember. And there was a cover, they were playing Stevie Wonder's Do I Do in the band that we were in. And James Brown's band had just landed from Atlanta, exhausted. And as we were playing Do I Do, they started to do the Boogaloo to Do I Do on the dance floor and on the floor in front of us. And again, ended up with applause. Things like that. Opening for Ray Charles enjoying what I was doing with the big band, then Ray Charles playing with the big band. That kind of stuff, peers that you look up to giving you recognition. That's my these are my golden moments.
Brilliant. Pat, it's been absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much for coming on and spending time with me today. I've loved every minute of it. Thank you.
Well, you're welcome.
All right. Speak to you soon.
All right, man.
That's it. We are all done for another episode of The Accidental Pop Star. If you enjoyed today's chat with Pat, I'd be very grateful if you would please consider subscribing to The Accidental Pop Star here on YouTube. We have plenty more interviews lined up, so jump on board. All you have to do is press that little subscribe button. So that's it, we're all done. I really hope you enjoyed today's chat with Pat, and I'll see you again very soon for a brand new episode of The Accidental Pop Star. Bye for now.